So let us continue looking at complex numbers. We want to look at powers of I. Remember, as we said before, I is equal to the square root of -1. Alright? Now, suppose we consider I squared. What do we get? Well, it's the square root of -1 times the square root of -1. Now, here, when you consider this, you remember that when you square a number and find the square root, or when you find the square root of a number and then square what you get, you effectively get back the same number. So the square root of -1 squared is going to be -1. So therefore I squared is -1. What about I cube? Well, I cube is I squared times I. I squared is -1 times the square root of -1. Right? But it is -1 I. See? So it is actually negative I. If you reason it out, you see that it is equal to negative I. Alright? Now, what about I raised to the power of 4? What would that be? Well, in this case, it is I squared, if you remember your indices, alright? So, it is -1 squared. I squared is -1, you know. -1 squared is what? 1. So I to the 4 is 1. See that? Now, what I want you to do is figure out I to the 5th, I to the 6th. I want you to also figure out I to the 30, I to the 55, I to the 60. Let me write the 55, rewrite it again. So, what about figuring these out? Pause the video and see if you can figure them out. Okay, you finished? So let's look at I to the 5. I to the 5 is really I to the 4th times I, which is I squared I. But I squared is -1. -1 squared I would be just I. Alright? So -1 squared is 1. 1 times I is I. And we looked at -1 squared up here already. Now, what about I to the 6? If you remember your indices, you remember that this is I to the 2I squared cube, alright? I squared is what? -1. So it's -1 to the power of 3. When you raise a negative number to an odd power, it becomes negative. So what you have is -1. Alright? So you see that? Now, what is I to the 30? Interesting. Well, this looks more like it's going to be I squared. 2 times what gives you 30? 15. So, I squared is -1. So it's -1 to the 15 power. See that? Now, you raise a -1 to an odd power. So it's going to be a -1. Okay? You have to remember your indices to deal with this. What about I to the 55? Interesting. I to the 55 is I times, I want an even power to one side so that I can say it is I squared to that even power. So it is I to the 1 times I to the 54. You see that? I to the 1, I to the 54. I to the 1 is I. So it's I times what? I to the 54 is I squared to a power. It is I squared to the power of half of 54 is what? 26, 27. 27, no? To the 27, 2, 7, 14, bring down the 4, carry 1, 2, 2, 1, 5. Right. So what you have is I multiplied by negative 1 to the power of 27. See that? So what you have is a negative 1 to an odd power, so it's going to be negative. So it's I times negative 1, which is negative I. See that? Now, here, I to the 60. This one is even simpler than the 55 because we can say it is I squared to the power of 30, which is negative 1 to the 30. And what you have is negative 1 to an even power. So it's 1. The answer is 1. Alright? So you can see that. So, what you have in terms of powers of I, you first have I. When you square I, you get negative 1. So the powers 1, 2, 3, I cube is negative 1 times I. Alright? Which is negative I, because I cube is negative, it's going to be, let me put it this way, I cube is I times I squared, which is negative 1 times I, which is negative I. Then to the fourth power is negative, it is I squared, so it is negative 1 squared, which is positive 1, so it's 1. Then I to the 5 is going to be I squared times 1 multiply I squared times 1. I squared is 1. Times I. I to the 5 is I times I to the 4th, which is I times I squared. We found I squared to be 1, so it's I times 1, which is I. So this is I. When you have the power of 6, it is I squared cube, which is negative 1, cube, which is negative 1. So negative 1. Then to the 7th would be what? When you work this one out, and say I to the 7th, what you have is I times I to the 6th, which is I times I squared cube, which is I times negative 1 cube, which is I times negative 1 cube is negative 1, which is negative I. See that? Then you have 8. I to the 8 is I squared to the 4th, which is negative 1 to the 4th. So negative 1 raised to an even power give you positive 1. So it's 1. Now notice, you have I, negative 1, negative I, 1. I, negative 1, negative I, 1. If you continue this, you're going to have I, negative 1, negative I, 1. It's a cycle. Right? So it will be cycling from I to negative 1 to negative I to 1. Then I, negative 1, negative I, 1. Then I, negative 1, negative I, 1. So that's a cycle that will repeat itself. So here, these are powers of I.